the News Channel 5 network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on Morning Line. I'm Nick Barris, coming to you on this Tuesday to talk about, or rather Wednesday, what am I saying? This week is ripping by, is it not? It is Wednesday, to talk about a very important topic. This month of October is Domestic Violence Awareness Month. I've always said whenever we talk about this topic that it should be every month that we talk about it and increase awareness and talk about the services that are out there. But October is one good hook reason for us to do it again, and that's what we're going to do this morning. We're going to take your phone calls if you want to join in the conversation. Certainly sometimes we get calls from folks out there that are maybe dealing with this type of situation. If you are, you're invited to call here now. And beyond that, we want to educate and let folks know what services are out there and everything else with an organization that is at the forefront of this here in Middle Tennessee and across the country, frankly. They do such a wonderful job trying to provide support services, especially for families going through this, the YWCA. Sharon Roberson is with us this morning.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having us.
Good to have you on. I like the fact that you kept saying yes, yes, reaffirming what I was saying. She is Executive Director with the YWCA here in Middle Tennessee. And YWCA does so much. Also, you are the folks who run what is, I guess, the largest domestic violence shelter in the state?
Correct. That's correct.
And it's growing. It's about to grow.
Yes. Presently, we have 51 beds, and we found out very early on, especially in the last few years, that we were having a shortage of beds. So the quickest short-term solution was to repurpose space in our present shelter, and by the end of November, we'll have 65 beds.
Wow.
That will be.
And the need, and you say you could even have more.
Yes, we'll have to look at a long-term plan because, as we all know, Nashville is growing, and unfortunately, that also brings some of the negative aspects of growth.
Okay, well, she is the president and CEO of the YWCA, and I was asking her about the domestic violence shelters, which most of you should know. We've done stories before, but these are to be at secret locations for a lot of good reasons. We don't publicize where they are. We don't want people to know where they are because you can have the batterer track down the victim, right?
Yes. Well, we work very hard. Unfortunately, technology is evolving.
How's that changed?
And with cell phones and tracking devices, and that's part sometimes of the control over an individual knowing where they are at all times. We work very hard to make sure that if an individual is coming into shelter, that they know how to protect themselves and protect the integrity of the shelter by working through some of those aspects with them on the phone of how to safety plan even to come into shelter.
Yeah, so ahead of time you're saying, hey, you've got to turn off that locator or turn off your phone, period, so it can't be tracked.
Correct.
But because of that, I didn't even think of that. I mean, in the past, you know, you could find a way to shuttle them there safely. Once they get there, if they have their phone, they can be tracked. There is, at a lot of these locations, quite a bit of security, right?
Yes,
they're very locked on. There's security guards. There are fences, things like that, right?
Yes. I mean, we do have a really extraordinary amount of security because we want to make sure that every victim that comes into our shelter is not only feel safe, but is safe.
Okay. Would you give me a profile of the typical type of victim you would bring in?
Well, see, that's very difficult because that's one of the myths of domestic violence. Sometimes I think there's a view they're low income, of a certain race, a certain background, and that's really not the case. It's really anyone that for whatever reason does not have a support system other than coming into our shelter. Certainly there are individuals that do have the economic means to go have other alternatives in the event they want to leave a domestic violence situation, but it could be really anyone. And I think that the atypical person is what people don't realize. All types of people come into our shelter.
Of all gender?
Well, we do not at present have the facilities for for males at our shelter. However, we do work with males who are victims of domestic violence. And
there are some, correct?
Oh, yes, most definitely. Most definitely.
There are some males that are victims to it, but
definitely.
The predominant victims are
female, by far.
It's not even close. It's not even close. Doesn't mean you want to ignore a male that is victim of this, but it is women. It is women, and sometimes children, right?
And also pets.
Talk about the pet aspect of it. That's interesting to me.
Well, since the root of domestic violence is power and control, individuals want power and control over another person, and you use whatever means they can to have that power and control. That could be a family member, but often it is children and pets.
So someone who loves a pet, he knows it.
Yes.
He uses the pet to get them to do what he wants, or he may harm the pet.
Correct.
So the shelter can take in women, their children, and the pet?
Well, right now we do not have facilities for pets other than, of course, service animals.
Yeah.
With that said, we're working toward our goal of actually finding a way to protect all victims of domestic violence, which will include pets. We do work with you and try to find fostering and other avenues to take care of your pets, and we can work through that with you if you develop a safety plan. Our crisis line, in fact, most people will not want to come into a shelter, but we can help them work through the challenges and how to leave a domestic violence situation, which can include how to take care of your pets.
Absolutely. We'll put up that crisis line before the end of the program for sure for folks. The number up there right now is if you want to call and join in the conversation, 737-7587 if you want to ask a question. And I think the important thing about this show is to educate, and we've talked about it before, but all right, someone's saying, explain to us, what is domestic violence? And you may say, well, Nick, come on, everyone knows. Well, I don't know. Where does the line get crossed? What is the difference between an argument between a couple, that's just an argument, and something that escalates to a level of domestic violence?
All right. Well, first of all, most people are familiar with the physical form of domestic violence.
Sure.
They're familiar with the bruises and the hits and those sorts of things, and most people understand that. But domestic violence can take several forms. Domestic violence can be insults. It could be controlling behavior, saying what you wear. There's a psychological aspect. In fact, when you talk to victims, they will tell you the psychological damage from domestic violence often lasts much longer than the physical domestic violence. And also there's a financial part to domestic violence. One campaign that goes on this month is with the Purple Purse, which is an Allstate Foundation domestic violence initiative, and is really targeted toward financial domestic violence. You control all the resources such that the person cannot live freely because they have to go through you for everything. So there's a psychological, emotional, physical, and financial. All of those are aspects of domestic violence, and it's all about the control that that person has over another person.
Do you think we've done a good enough job at this point making people understand the answer to the question, well, heck, she's getting beat up, why doesn't she just leave? And I know the answer to that, of course, but I mean, that's asked sometimes. Well, why don't they just leave?
Well, first of all, it's much more complicated than that.
Of course.
And I think that a lot of people really don't understand that because it seems obvious if you're in harm's way, but you have to look at the totality of the facts.
Yeah.
You have to look at, first of all, it often starts with a person that you have an emotional attachment to. I think if you went out with someone on the first date and they physically beat you up,
yeah, that's it. Yeah, right.
But that's not the way domestic violence works.
Right.
It's gradually builds to that, and so often the person or victim will try to get back to that state of when everything was good, and that's what we call the cycle. You often start off love, and then intimidation, then violence, then back to love. And if you ask a lot of people, they will say often there are family issues. You have children together, the families know each other, you have social circles together, and you're really asking a person to extract themselves from everything they know, their family, their securities, and there's a lot of pressure, their churches even.
Think about it.
It's difficult.
And financial.
Yes.
So, some women may not feel that they can take off with their child knowing how am I going to pay for whatever we go to.
Because especially if you have many victims have told me, they said that he did not want me to work, and they saw that as a wonderful thing because then they would, you know, be able to stay at home with the kids. It sounded good, but then when things turn sour, they don't have any means of support.
All right. Well, listen, the number is 737-7587. There's a lot of things that I want to cover this morning with you, as well as some things that we can talk about that YWCA is involved with specifically. That's very interesting. Again, an important show. We're going to take a break. When we come back, if you have any questions, feel free to join us. We'll continue our conversation right after this. All right, stay with us. Sure.